Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here today. I am Cristine Bughao, and I will be explaining my understanding about the statement, natural hazards are part of life, but hazards only become disaster when people's lives and livelihoods are swept away. Let us remind ourselves that we can and must reduce the impacts of natural disaster by building sustainable communities that have long-term capacity to live with risk. Before we proceed, let us first know the discrepancy between hazards and disaster.
Hazard is a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity, or condition that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, property damage, loss of livelihood and service, social and economic disruption, or environmental. Examples of hazards are typhoon, earthquakes, bombings, volcanic eruption, landslide, floods, drought, tornado, forest fires, and tsunami. While disaster is defined as a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society involving widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources.
Yes, it is true that natural hazards are part of our lives, and it only becomes disaster when our lives and livelihoods are being damaged.
Now, let us take a closer look of the difference between hazard and disaster. Again, hazard is a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity, or condition. One of the examples of hazard is the typhoon Yolanda, while disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community. Community is in a disaster if it is in the state of emergency. The typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines caused a state of emergency. That is why it is a serious disruption that caused losses of lives, material, economic, and environmental. Yolanda is a hazard in the community. Because of this hazard, it caused a disaster.
It is uttered in the statement that we can reduce the impact of natural disaster by building sustainable communities. But the question is, how can we do that? First, we can develop sustainable communities by preserving and improving our environment. We must plant trees, avoid deforestation, reduce greenhouse gases, and preserve biological diversity. Second, to develop sustainable communities, we should be resilient. Be prepared for the unknown, such as climate change, economic shocks, or even pandemic. Third, we should practice in reducing, reusing, and recycling of materials. Lastly, we can build sustainable community by educating the society about our environment and disaster preparedness. By understanding our environment, we become more resilient. Yes, it is true that we cannot stop natural disaster, but we can definitely reduce it by understanding the nature and the environment. Again, the 4 ways on how we can develop sustainable community are: first, by preserving and improving the environment. Second, we should be resilient. Third, we must practice reduce, reuse, and recycle. And lastly, we must educate the society. So that is my understanding about the statement, Natural hazards are part of life, but hazards only become disaster when people's lives and livelihoods are swept away. Let us remind ourselves that we can and must reduce the impact of natural disaster by building sustainable communities that have long-term capacity to live with risk. Thank you for watching.